Okay, this is my beautiful and talented daughter, Chesney. She's going to tell you about her car, and then we're going to talk about what we're going to do with it.
This is Franklin, that's his name. He is a Oldsmobile Omega 1978. He has a TDI 350 engine with an overdrive automatic transmission.
And it's got 373s in the rear end. It actually runs really well. That TBI 350 is plenty for this car. It sits pretty low to the ground. It's got a nice muscle car stance. There's very little fender gap, so it looks good. It handles pretty good for a 78 bone stock GM car. Before we got it, they put that engine and transmission in it. They redid the interior. It's still in pretty good shape. But because we're in East Texas, some of the roads are not in that great of shape. And with it sitting as low as it is, we end up, if she's got more than one person in it, it wants to drag the header collectors. And she wants to drive it on the beach, go down to Crystal Beach with it. So we're gonna do something a little bit different, and we're gonna make it into a beach rod. We're gonna give it a little bit of a lift, put a little bigger off-road tires on it, and we're gonna do it for as little money as possible. So we're gonna pull it apart today, see what we're dealing with as far as springs and everything, and then figure out our exact plan. And we'll get back with you once we've made some progress. So we're back on Chesney's beach rod. We got the front end all tore apart. I didn't go get a coil spring compressor because as low as it sat, I made the assumption that it had low ring springs or the factory springs had been cut. We actually got it apart and we had to fight to get the old springs out because they had not been cut. The tallest stock springs for these, the V8 heavy duty springs, are 16.6 inches tall. That's what these are. So we're thinking that maybe those are weak and sagging because they're 42 years old. So what's the plan now, Ches?
Now we're going to order more springs to put in there, and then we're going to add a 1-inch spacer and then get some new tires on it. I want to put a bigger set of tires on the back to kind of make it look more like a hot rod. And the springs are the LS heavy duty springs.
Okay. All right. We'll get the heavy duty V8 springs on it and spacers, and then we'll come back to you and tell you what we got. All right, we finally got all our pieces for Franklin here and got the new V8 springs put on the front with a 1-inch thick aluminum spacer. And that netted us about 4 inches of lift. Before I could barely get my fingers in there, and now there's lots of room. So now that we've got that done and measured out, figured out how much we gained, we're gonna move back to the rear and get that lifted up. How are we gonna do that, Ches?
We're going to take the leaf springs from below the axle and move them to on top of the axle, and then that should give us 5 to 6 inches of lift.
All right, we'll be back soon with another update. So I had a couple people ask me why we haven't got a video out with the finished product on the beach rod. And there's a couple reasons. One of them is I'm having a hard time finding reasonably priced 7/16 short shank mag lug nuts for the imitation center lines we found. The other reason is we had a failure. I decided to not measure when I redid the shock mounts for the rear. We sprung the rear end over, meaning we moved the leaf springs to the top of the axle from under the axle. And when we did that, I made my own top plates. It's just a chunk of flat steel to spread the clamping force out for the U-bolts. And initially I decided that the easiest way to make my lower shock mounts would be to just weld a piece of angle to that flat chunk of steel. And I'm happy to say my weld held, but that thin flat chunk of steel was not nearly strong enough to take the force of the shocks, especially since I didn't measure and figure out what height that bottom mount really should be. So since then, we pulled it back apart. I will preface this by saying I'm not a welder, I'm not a fabricator. I just know about enough to be dangerous. We've gone back in, made some new mounts, took some measurements, made sure that we figured out where that shock should be. We may have some grinding left to do to make sure everything clears the way it should, because that shock body is really close to the leaf spring, but we'll see where it is when we cycle it. So we've had to redo the shock mounts. This is the driver's side. Went with heavier steel and angle iron, so it's got more structural support. I'll go around to the passenger side and show you that. So again, heavier steel, angle iron. Yeah, I know the welds aren't pretty, but they're done by an amateur with a flux core wire feed. And so far they've proven strong on everything I've welded on. So as long as I choose the right materials and put them in the right place, I think we'll be successful. So we'll be back again soon, hopefully with a finished product once we can get the right lug nuts and get some big tires and see how it looks when we're all done. So it's been a while since we did an update on Chesney's Beach Rod. She was saving money for tires, which hadn't quite happened yet, but it recently had a mishap involving a chain link fence, and fortunately no one was hurt except the fence and the beach rod. Chesney wasn't driving, but at any rate, now we have some additional repairs to do. Some chrome work that's pretty beat up. Looks like we're going to get to play with fiberglass. Some windshield trim, body work. We got scratches all the way up. Got some dents in the roof. So it looks like it'll be getting the cosmetic stuff that we weren't super worried about sooner than we expected. But overall, the suspension work is done. Seems like everything's working the way it should be. We ended up with between 4 and 5 inches of lift from where it was sitting before. She's hoping to put a taller tire than on the back than on the front. Looks like by test fitting the wheels we're going to put on it, these imitation center lines, it looks like the front, the biggest we're going to be able to do is going to be 235 75/15s, and she's hoping to go taller and wider in the back, kind of a old school look and a rally car look. To do it all, again, we went through the front end, put in new springs, put in a 1-inch thick spacer. I'm not sure if we'll be able to see it under here. You won't see the spacer because it's under there down in the cup. And then got it aligned. The new springs brought it up quite a bit, I think, because the old ones were sagging pretty good. But we were able to get it aligned even with the spacer in there. Added new shocks. I do still need to do the sway bar extensions, kind of like they do on the Jeeps and stuff. On the back, we did a spring over. Also similar to what a lot of people do on old Jeeps and trucks to get the axle under the springs instead of on top of it. Everything came out pretty good there. That's a pretty simple operation if you've got access to a welder, a little bit of time. So there's the beach rod as it sits now. Sounds like we'll be doing paint and body sooner than we expected, and we'll get some pictures up once we get tires on it. Welcome back to Half A Hot Rods. We're finally finished with the budget build on Chesney's beach rod. So we'll show you what we came up with and what we ended up spending total. Hold tight for just a minute. Okay, we're back out here with Chesney and her car, Franklin, and she's gonna tell you how we finished it up, and I'm gonna help her.
So in the front, we decided to put a 235/75 on it. And then in the back, we have a 3110/50.
All right, what's under the hood?
A TDI 350 and an overdrive automatic.
Okay, so if you haven't seen the other videos, what we did is we pulled out the old worn out springs from the front, replaced them with new ones, put I want to say it's 1.5 inch spacer in there. That netted us about 4 inches of total lift from where it was sitting before. In the back, we sprung it over, and there's another video on that prior to this that kind of goes over what we did there. We went and found used centerline knockoffs to put on it because the car had 14-inch wheels, and they're just not big tires available for 14-inch wheels. And she saved her money, and we waited and we looked and we tried to find used tires on Marketplace, and we just couldn't find any that were gonna work. So today she finally had enough money, and we had a little time off at the same time, and she went out and sprung for all new tires. We still managed to stay real close to what I had hoped our budget would be, and we'll kind of run through what we did here. We replaced the front springs, got them online. Those were about $100. We did front shocks, front spacers, the axle mounts that we had to weld onto the back. You can get them cheaper than that to do the spring over, but these ones had 3 holes drilled in them, so you could move the center line of the leaf spring front and back on the axle to get your angles and everything right. Front shocks, rear shocks, which I haven't done yet, but we're gonna get those done because we tried to reuse the old ones and they're just trash. They're just wore out. We did sway bar links while we were in there. The wheels we bought used off of Marketplace, and then the tires were the biggest chunk. I was hoping to stay under 1,000, but you can see there we were right at 1,055. So I don't feel too bad about it. I think for the money spent, she's got a really cool looking car. It's something different than what everybody else is doing. It's not slammed on air ride. And if she wants to take it down a dirt road, or most importantly, a beach, she can do that. So stay tuned. We'll be getting into the body repair on it. We're gonna do some custom paint work on it, fix the stuff that her brother messed up. Oh, we weren't gonna say who did that. Oh well, he knows who did it. Anyway, we'll get back to that stuff and let you know as we're doing it how the project's going. Like any of these that I'm doing, they're all low buck, and she's paying for it herself, so it kind of depends on when she comes up with the money to keep going. So until next time, remember, if I can do it, you can do it.